So also thank you for showing up at the end of a work day. It's nice to have you all here, even though you're not occupying the front seats. I won't take that personally. Thank you very much. So I'm going to just start by saying the title of this event did not contain the keyword workshops. And so it's around events. And there's something quite different about running a workshop versus running an event. And I'll take you through 2 or 3 examples that highlight that. But before I do, I've been working in this field for about 2 decades now and worked with different industries and different sectors in different parts of the world. And I'll take you through sort of how I think around futures. And the first thing is that you need to understand what's going on across a whole range of different areas, not just technology, because technology moves fast and gets lots of attention. It's very tempting to stay focused on it. And up until 3 years ago, when I would talk to leadership teams and ask them what else has the potential to disrupt the world, they would generally go blank. But of course, now they know more than technology can disrupt the stable state of the world and are more interested in other things in addition to technology. Once you sort of start looking higher, then you can start to filter it down. So what does it mean for the place where we play? What does it mean for our industry and our sector? Last but not least, what are the right questions that you should be asking? Often what I find is that when I'm talking to strategy teams, they start on the far right-hand side of this, and then they get surprised when things happen that they haven't actually thought about, that they haven't gone back up the stack. So starting at the far left-hand side and working your way down the stack actually gets you to a far better place than being constantly surprised and reactive. People also spend time on these projects, quite a lot of time and money, and one of the questions that I get asked is this: so why would you invest in this? So when I was working alongside the Shell Game Changer team in The Hague, Shell would have invested, I would say, $5 or $6 million in the programs that we ran at the time, global programs. Those programs then informed the Game Changer team, informed the scenarios team, and sort of filtered into the global strategy for Shell. And they invested in that because it's really important to understand your future beyond normal planning timeframes. And until recently, putting a number on the benefit from that was quite tricky. Then there was some research done by McKinsey, and they said actually firms that think long-term and organisations that think long-term outperform their peers by quite a significant margin. That's for commercial organisations, but it probably holds true for almost anybody in any sector, right? Getting outside your normal timelines actually helps you anticipate rather than react. So if you see how this starts to play out around the world, so that's in the private sector. In the public sector, you've seen some really interesting responses. So this is Macron in August last year. And effectively what he's saying is we are potentially heading into a polycrisis. So a polycrisis is a number of different fast-moving stacks of change when they all start to cascade and collide in ways that are unpredictable. And if you look back through recent history, there are examples where you can see a benchmark for a polycrisis actually is. And the benchmark I look at is this period of time in the late 60s. And this was quite a remarkable period around the world because effectively what you had was you had the 6-Day War in Israel, you had Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy assassinated, you had the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, you had North Korea capturing US naval ships, you had a space race kicking off, you had anti-racism protests at the Olympics, you had 1 million people rioting on the streets of France, all this basically within 18 months. And if you look back at the records of people at that time, they say it felt like the world was collapsing. So that's a genuine polycrisis. There's a whole different story of what happened after that, but that's what a polycrisis looks like. There are some really interesting parallels right now with what's going on in the world. Tensions in the Middle East, riots on the streets of Paris, a new space race kicking off, technology changes, a whole bunch of things going on, which suggests that there is something deeper than individual risk happening. So the other way of thinking about this is encapsulated in my favourite cartoon from the New Yorker. It says, "Sir, the following paradigm shifts occurred while you were out." And you can be out in all sorts of ways. And the most recent example of this came from the World Economic Forum. So you may know of these people. They organise events in Davos every year. In January each year, they also organise this thing called the Global Risk Report. And what they do is they go to the network and they say, we are interested in your opinion about what are the greatest risks facing the world in the next 10 years. They do this fantastic report. They come with these great infographics. One of the infographics of note is this one here. So this is the top 10 risks over the next 10 years, published in January 2020, which was the amalgamation of a bunch of experts around the world thinking about what could possibly happen in the next 10 years. So from left to right, extreme weather, climate action failure, natural disaster, biodiversity loss, human-made environmental disaster, data fraud, cyber attacks, water crises, global governance failure, and an asset bubble. So in January 2020, what do you think was missing from that? Top 10 risks in the next 10 years. Right? But the report, although it did mention pandemics, it wasn't one of the top risks, but it did focus a lot on forest fires and wildfires and climate change because the east coast of Australia was on fire at the time. So often what you find is that people look forward by looking in the rearview mirror, right? So what's going to happen next 3 or 4 years? Well, it's a straight line. It doesn't work so well when you're coming into a polycrisis environment. And what you're seeing is that the way we think about opportunity and risk requires you to think about how you think. So what are the mental models that you use to process information, and what do they mean to the way in which you spot either opportunity or risk if you're heading into a highly volatile operating environment? So there used to be, and still is in many organisations, this idea of this sort of Newtonian decision-making hierarchy. So you've got the right information in front of the right people at the right time, they'll do the right thing, but that actually doesn't work. And without going into too much detail, there was an experiment designed by the Harvard Medical School and ran in 2013, where they showed a group of radiologists with the radiographers this image, and they said, can you please spot anything abnormal on this? And they tracked their eye motion, and 83% of them failed to spot something abnormal, which is the gorilla there, which is 10 times larger than the abnormalities they are trained to look for. So people who are trained to look for one thing, when they saw this image, even though their eyes looked directly at the gorilla, they didn't report it because it didn't fit their mental models. And when you're heading into this environment of increased volatility and complexity, you need to be able to understand how to look outside your mental models to look for what might cause further disruption. So here's the gorilla, in case you missed it online, nicely highlighted. Interestingly, novices spotted it really quickly. Gorilla, gorilla, gorilla every single time, right? What's abnormal? Trained people discount it. So I'm going to talk about ways in which you can break through this sort of cognitive bias to get attention from people who would otherwise not give you their attention. So I'll talk about ways in which you can create resonance around certain messages. I'll give you a range of different case studies. The first one was the program with Shell Tech Futures in 2007, actually 2006 to 2008. And we ran this program for them and was looking at the impact of technology on society in a 20-year time frame. And we looked at the brief and we spent some time talking to the team and decided the best way to do this was sort of like a Delphi approach. So we found subject matter experts in areas that were outside of Shell's remit, and we brought them together for workshops around the world. So this was in Bangalore, that one. We also brought them to that's Egham outside of London, ran workshops in those places, plus Houston, a few other places as well. And what we did was bring in people who had great insights about areas where we thought might create impact on Shell's core business. And there were some conversations that happened with those teams, which I quite clearly remember today, where someone in one of these subject matter area experts would say something, and literally like the mouths would fall open on the show. It's like, we're doing what? I've never heard, why haven't we heard of this? And some of the stuff, I still can't talk about it, but it was pretty fundamentally challenging to their core business model. It was extraordinary because essentially what they were doing was sitting across the table from people who didn't care about the Shell business model. And so what this did was create resonance amongst the senior team by hearing first-hand insights they would not otherwise be exposed to. A lot of our work was spent trying to track these people down, trying to find people who were really credible, who had great peer-reviewed research, and then basically getting hold of them and saying, we would like to fly you into Bangalore or Houston or London for 5 days. You're going to have a really interesting conversation. You're going to meet people you've never met before, and it's all expenses paid. Do you want to come? And they basically said yes. But it was just fascinating to get that breakthrough. One of the conversations, I quite did remember one of the Shell guys saying, but we know about that because I wrote a paper about it 2 years ago and it's sitting in the library. And the other guys sort of went, what library? You know, they didn't know they had a library in the first place, right? So how do you actually start to cut through? Another example, working in healthcare, this is a local example. At the same time, I was commuting around the world to various places. I was working with the executive team of a very unlikely client, which is the Canterbury DHB. So a healthcare organisation which has about 18,000 people. They're responsible for some of them directly, but most indirectly, so physiotherapists, GPs, pharmacists, etc. And they spend about 1.4 billion a year on healthcare in Canterbury alone. And the challenge from the chief executive at the time was we can see the cracks appear in the system. We don't know when they're going to appear, what they're going to look like, or how we're going to respond. So we did a bunch of work, which I don't have time to go into now, but effectively we built scenarios that said there's going to be less money for infrastructure, so you can't build new healthcare facilities like hospitals because money's not falling from the sky. There's going to be increased demand because Canterbury is ageing faster than the rest of the country, and an ageing population means a decrease in workforce. So you have these 3 basic conditions which are going to dictate how you design healthcare in the next 10 years. And the reaction from the exec team was, that's great, we do that. How are we going to actually start to create cultural change amongst 18,000 people? So that was a great challenge. So what we did is we set this thing called Showcase. And effectively Showcase was, excuse me, we built this cross between an interactive museum, a corporate roadshow, and a vision document brought to life. We transformed this 10,000 square metre warehouse using theatre set designers, electricians, painters, sparkies, all sorts of people. And we built exhibits where people came through in small groups of up to 10, and they went through this carefully designed narrative that took them from past state into a future state, and each group had a tour guide with them that explained everything about the exhibits they were seeing. So a group of 10 took about 2 hours to go through. We built up scenarios, we brought things to life. So we mocked up care situations. We did before and afters. We had information on the walls about particular care pathways, which is all designed by clinicians we worked with. And in the end, we said to people, one key question is, what are you going to do to make it better? What's your role to actually start making this change? And what was fascinating was people basically sat down and said, well, I need to step up and do this, or I can do that, or I work in a different way. And this program was the foundation for a transformation program which became world famous apart from in New Zealand, which I still find extraordinary. So when we started in about 2006, what happened was clinicians would go to the local newspaper and they would express their frustration by doing editorials or front page news leaks, exclusives. When we were at the peak of the program, this is coverage in The Guardian, which basically says, what can the NHS learn from New Zealand? That was in 2017. So within the space of 10 years, basically building on these scenarios in a large-scale transformation program, we took people to a future state by bringing it to life as a foundation for where things could get to, as opposed to, here's the report, you should read it, it's in the library. So Showcase was one aspect of that. There were other things that ran alongside it that maintained change and built momentum in the system. But Showcase was a really core part of that, bringing it to life, and it resonated. Resonated so much that the process to get people to come to Showcase, it wasn't a CEO email, it wasn't a memo, it wasn't anything in the media. We started off with 80 people, and we said to them, we're going to take you through this process. Won't you trust us? If at the end of the 2 hours you liked it and you think it's valuable, go out and find 10 colleagues that you think would enjoy it. So we scaled it through a word of mouth process. We created a social movement. We had 2,000 people come through. So if you subscribe to Malcolm Gladwell's theory about the tipping point, we blasted through that in the first week or so. We had to run Showcase for about 7 weeks. It was the first of 2 showcases we ran. Both were very successful. So it resonated based on future scenarios, bringing them to life. Nobody saw it as a futures or a foresight event, but we did it in a way that would resonate strongly with them. In the corporate world, also done work with large organisations as well, Z Energy being one of them. Most of my corporate work is covered by NDA, so I can't talk much about it. However, Mike Bennett's the previous chief exec of Z. Got up at an investor day once and said, we work with this guy called Roger Dennis, we're doing all this work, and I went, thank you, Mike, so I can now talk about it all. So one of the things that I do with clients is try and separate signal from noise about where the world is going and what's possible and where's opportunity. And what we did, we looked at where mobility was going. We spent a lot of time filtering down all the noise to get the key signals. Then we did a bunch of research looking at future mobility, because particularly they're a fossil fuel company that provides access to opportunity via mobility. Petrol is a bit of a grudge purchase. No one really wants to go to a petrol station, but want mobility. So we did a whole bunch of research about the future of mobility. As part of my work, I take clients on field trips. So we go to places around the world, we meet individuals, organisations, university startups, venture capitalists, where they are making the future happen ahead of anywhere else in country. And so we generally take 5 to 8 days, hit 3 or 4 cities around the world, get first-hand insights, come back, refresh, redesign. And then out of that, so we took some of the exec team from Z and took the board on 2 separate field trips. Then built a different sort of version of a showcase. So this was an image taken from the head office in Wellington. We brought this information semi to life with quite an interactive display where part of the exec team took the board through. There was also, what they produced was they called the house view of mobility. To investors, they talked about the future of mobility, what it would mean. And then out of this, they also decided that they would create skin in the game, test assumptions, run experiments about the future of mobility. Mobility is going electric. So Z had a share in Mevo, an electric ride-sharing company in Wellington, now in Auckland, Hamilton, and also purchased shares in Flick, an electricity retailer. And that really came from, where's the world going? What does it mean for our sector? What are the right questions we should be asking? How do you test assumptions? How do you get skin in the game? What experiments do you run? So I view this as a foresight event rather than a workshop. Right? Because if you're just doing workshops, there's no output and no consequence, then that's just not valuing people's time. In contrast, I'll tell you a different story, and this is one that Wendy's also very familiar with. So in 2015, we worked together with another colleague, and we spent about 4 months analysing the impact of a pandemic on New Zealand. Very quickly, we got to the point where it wasn't the primary impact of health that was around supply chains. And so we spent time with a lot of senior officials talking about this and senior corporate leaders. We produced a report, public domain, 140 or so pages, a whole bunch of clear recommendations. And when we went and talked to senior leaders about this, the reaction was basically, is it going to rain tomorrow? See the football last night? Watch a rugby game? And we were astounded because in our minds, this was just a clear and present signal about what could happen and how vastly unprepared the country was for a pandemic. And so I tell you this because in our minds, it was so clear that we wouldn't need much data. Everyone would instantly get it. But in hindsight, there are things we could have done better, but we were concerned about alarming people, right, being too over the top. But perhaps we could have done better with that one next time. Hope there is that next time. So I'll give an example. Was one that we thought would resonate, that everyone involved in the production of it thought would resonate, but it didn't hit the mark with leaders and leadership teams. And one of my corporate clients, he was banging his head against the wall, talking to industry groups and logistics and supply chains and saying, we want an hour of time at your annual event, and one of them will come and talk to you about it and bring it to life. They weren't interested. We tried that 2 years in a row. So I regard that as something we could have done better. But the silver lining is that in February 2020, when it was very clear to us and a couple of others what was going to happen, I spent a bit of time talking to a client of mine, Rush Digital in Auckland, and then we contacted the Ministry of Health and said, you need to have a digital scalable response to what's going to happen. Interestingly, when I had that call, they said, don't worry, you've got it under control. 2 weeks later, they ran back and said, please tell us more. And that became the COVID tracer app. So sort of silver lining out of something we didn't think resonated very well, but actually worked very well. And for my client, it went very well because they ended up exporting some of this tech around the world because other countries wanted to know how to do similar technology. So what does this mean for how you think about how you get the attention of leadership teams, which is scarce and always in demand? So in my experience, good leaders make decisions based on two axes. One is what's important and what's urgent. But when you put a long-term macro scale lens over this, what you find is that some of these issues start to move around, and they can move around very quickly, as they were in February and March 2020. So what's urgent and what's important changed markedly in the space of a few weeks. So this is why you need to think about the future. And then, because I'm running out of time, some of the lessons that I've learned from this over the years encapsulated in an article I co-authored with a professor at Wharton, and we coined this term the paradox of preparedness. So how is it that you can give people advance warning using foresight of things, but they don't pay attention? There's a whole bunch of lessons in that. It's available online at the Wharton University website. And you can read through that to get some more lessons about how to get scarce attention.
Hey, look, thank you very much for joining us. Absolutely fantastic to have both people in the room and the people out there in their offices and homes and wherever. But thank you very much. This is a Boosting Bubbles, part of the Boosting Bubbles series, and we've got at least 4 of them this year, and we're just trying to boost those bubbles that got created in early 2020, and we're trying to upskill. So Roger, thank you very much for launching this and starting this off.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Great.
Cool. Thank you, everybody.